Hi, I am Chris Fluker. I am the editorial page editor at the Orlando Sentinel, and I would like to welcome everybody to our discussion with gubernatorial candidate and former governor Charlie Crist, who has also served as Florida's Attorney General, Education Commissioner, State Senator, a member of the State House. He's challenging Ron DeSantis, a Republican incumbent. As previously announced, the Orlando Sentinel and the South Florida Sun Sentinel, due to a change in internal company-wide policy, will not be endorsing in this race. However, we are still doing interviews with candidates to give them a chance to address recent events, and we have offered the same opportunity to Governor DeSantis and senatorial candidates Val Demings and Marco Rubio. With that said, we are going to dive right in, and we're going to start with something that's happening right now. And if my colleague Dan Sweeney would, in South Florida, he's the deputy editorial page editor there, would like to address it, he can, or I will. It's up to you, Dan.
Sure. Even as we are talking, the verdicts are coming back in the Parkland trial of Nicholas Cruz.
Right.
I wanted to get your opinion on the death penalty as a whole, and also in this particular case, knowing that one particular case may not exactly describe your feelings on the whole topic. So, if you could tell me what exactly your feelings are regarding the Parkland trial and the decisions there, and also what your feelings are on the death penalty as a whole.
Sure. Well, I think the death penalty is warranted in this case. Number one, I mean, the crime is so horrific and devastating; it's unimaginable. And I feel and I support the death penalty where warranted. And I think certainly this case is a case where it is warranted. And that's my general feeling about it. And I've told people this before, Dan, that probably the most difficult thing that a governor does, one of the most difficult things that a governor does, is issue a death warrant. It is not something I did lightly, ever. And frankly, to be candid with all of you, the only way it was even possible for me to exercise that authority was to have literally the pictures of the victims on my desk in Tallahassee as the penalty was being carried out.
I will say, for the record, as we are talking, they're bringing back verdicts here, and we have so far it's been 3 out of 17, and they have not recommended death as of yet. Just for the record.
Thank you.
I did want to follow up, Governor Crist. This also raises the question of what Florida should do, if anything, with its gun laws to prevent further acts like this and like the massacre at the Pulse nightclub here in Orlando.
Great question, Chris. I think there's much to be done. And I've spoken about this a fair amount during the course of this campaign. And what I believe needs to be done are really 3 fundamental things. Number one, I think we need to ban assault weapons. Obviously, that would have impacted this case. Number 2, I think that, and let me expand upon that a little bit first. It's hard for me to comprehend the need for assault weapons for the general public in America. We had, as you all know, an assault weapon ban that was begun back in 1994 for about 10 years. And I thought that was appropriate. I want our military to have access to assault weapons, but I don't see why it's necessary or even advisable, for that matter, to have assault weapons available to the general public at large. I myself own a gun. I believe in the Second Amendment, but I think to not have an assault weapon ban is insane. Number 2, I think we need to have background checks that really do thorough background checks and check backgrounds appropriately. We have loopholes at gun shows, and private sales are a problem. Ghost guns are a problem. I think all of those need to be closed. And those kinds of sales must be scrutinized significantly. And number three, I think we need to have red flag laws nationwide. I've sponsored that in the U.S. Congress, as a matter of fact. And then the example I cite as the rationale behind it, fortunately, we have a red flag law in Florida, as you all know. But let's say somebody goes to Savannah, Georgia, and they go to a gun show, and they get an assault weapon or what have you, and they may not have been of a proper capacity mentally or emotionally to have been sold a firearm. Then they go from Savannah to North Florida somewhere, and they utilize the gun. That's why I think red flag laws nationwide are not only appropriate but necessary. So those three things I think are fundamental in addressing this horrific problem that we have nationwide, and we probably have more of these assaults across the country this year than we've had in a very long time, if ever. And so that's why I feel very strongly about this issue. And my opponent, I should point out, Governor DeSantis, wants open carry. So the contrast could not be any more clear, frankly, as it is with almost every issue during the course of this campaign, myself vis-a-vis him.
I'd like to change gears on this if I could. Another sort of recent news item would be Hurricane Ian and the devastation that it caused across the state, especially in Southwest Florida. I'm wondering, with Governor DeSantis's preparation, with Governor DeSantis's follow-up to the storm, is there anything that, as governor, you would have done differently?
Jay, there's no question about that. And more to the lead up to the storm itself. I think the lapse in leadership was apparent and obvious when you saw the evacuation order issued late for Lee County. I live in Pinellas County, St. Petersburg. And what happened there, we had an evacuation order issued a day before Lee County. And, why the governor wouldn't have taken the storm more seriously beforehand, that's the time when you have the opportunity to save life. That's the time when you do what is necessary to protect health, safety, and welfare of our fellow Floridians. And I think that he missed it there. It is clear in hindsight that he did. We've lost over 100 Floridians as a result of this storm. It is the most deadly hurricane in modern Florida history. And so if we don't learn something from this, we never will. And I know it's inconvenient to evacuate, but death is a lot more inconvenient and a lot more serious. And I think inconvenience does not trump the saving of Floridians' lives. And so I condemn him on that. The follow-up afterwards, Florida has been dealing with hurricanes for decades. And both Republican and Democratic governors have an apparatus available to them that sort of runs on itself, if you will, once a hurricane does occur. And thank God we have that, and it's pretty darn effective. And so I think that, it's before the storm hit where true leadership really comes to bear, and it didn't in this case, and it breaks my heart.
Thank you very much for that answer. We did touch on this in the first time we talked, but there's been some discussion since on Florida's preparation regarding property insurance. And I'd like to give you a chance to just lay out your roadmap for getting Florida's property insurance market back on track.
Well, thank you, Chris. We're before the storm, we were in the throes of a property insurance crisis. You all covered it very well, and kudos to you for doing so. Yet even with that coverage and sounding the alarm as you all did and other media outlets throughout the state, nothing was done. Now, I know that the governor called a property insurance special session, but it was a property insurance special session that did virtually nothing. It didn't help consumers one iota. It didn't really stabilize the market. Subsequent to that special session, more companies have left the market. So that's the best evidence there is that it wasn't effective. Contrast that to my leadership. in the first Crist administration, I too held a property insurance special session. And that was about a month after I got sworn in as governor. We were able to lower rates by about 10% for consumers. We fought for consumers. The market was stabilized. Insurance companies did not leave in droves. I think they understood what I suspected they would, that the market's too big to leave. It's too tempting. They want to make a profit very much, and I understand making a profit, but I don't understand allowing them to gouge our fellow Floridians when we need to have property insurance, homeowners insurance, windstorm coverage, and it's failing and failing and failing under DeSantis' lack of leadership. And I find it appalling because there was so much notice about it, so much discussion in the public square about it. But you ought to remember, the insurance industry gave him $3 million for his reelect. So, he's got some issues he's dealing with and some people he doesn't want to upset. And that may be part of the reason.
The other big impact that we have seen, and it is one that took almost a week to reach its peak, is the dramatic increase in flooding, inland flooding, that we saw. The St. Johns River did not reach its peak for almost a week. The same with the Wekiva. What can Florida do about mitigating some of these impacts, which are very clearly tied, I think most of us would agree, to the global shift in climate that we've seen?
Chris, there's no question about that. Climate change is real, it is present, and it's dangerous. And we saw it in, full display in the wake of this hurricane. And compared to Hurricane Charlie, which hit in the same part of Florida in 2004, was 3 times less the size, however, of Hurricane Ian. So these storms are getting bigger, they're getting stronger and more destructive. And that affects flooding. It affects windstorm damage. Both of those 2 storms, Charlie and Ian, hit about 155 mile per hour winds. But as I say, Ian was 3 times the size of Hurricane Charlie. And so if we can't learn from that real and present example, the best evidence possible to us as Floridians, as to rising sea levels, as to these storm floods that we saw in the rivers you cited. I saw it in Volusia County too. Touring there about 10 days ago in many of their creeks. And this is a problem that has been ignored by this administration, frankly, ignored by the prior administration, not even being able to utter the words. What is that, the head in the sand approach? We are probably the state that is most susceptible to rising sea levels. Yet we've now had 2 administrations that have ignored that problem. And to add insult to injury, the legislature put in their budget funding to make sure that we had the ability to harden our structures, increase the seawalls that we utilize to protect us against rising sea levels when these events occur. And not a penny was used this past year. And we have the largest budget in the history of the state of Florida at $110 billion. It's inexcusable, irresponsible, and deeply reckless. And the Florida people pay the consequence of this lack of leadership that we have at the top right now.
Is there an issue that you've heard about from voters during your campaign in the last few months that maybe wasn't on your radar before, that perhaps wasn't top of mind until voters have brought it up on the trail?
Well, they brought one up on the trail in a chorus of despair since June. That is a woman's right to choose. And of course, as we all know, it's a result of the Supreme Court ruling in the Dobbs case, overturning Roe versus Wade. And everywhere I go, we had a focus on it earlier this week, to focus on choice and how fundamentally important this is. I started hearing about it after the governor signed his 15-week bill. And it had insult to injury, though, with that piece of legislation, having no exception for rape or incest is absolutely barbaric to me. and I think unconstitutional. Certainly it's unconstitutional under the Florida Constitution, which, as you know, has a higher degree of a right to privacy within it than the United States Constitution. And so this issue, I think, has aggravated women, aggravated fair-minded men like myself. And it's appalling that this governor, this legislature would use this issue to try to further his presidential ambition. And I think that's exactly why it was done. Much like the migrant fiasco and stunt that he pulled, and the fact that, he went ahead and chartered 2 jets to go to San Antonio. We all know the story. Lured these almost 50 asylum seekers, they were there legally, and lured them onto these planes, flew them all over across the country, taking them to Martha's Vineyard. There was a 1-year-old child on that flight. There was a pregnant woman on that flight, and the governor didn't care. Being able to use fellow human beings as political pawns again to further his presidential aspiration. I mean, the guy clearly, let's just be honest, is trying to appeal to the very hard right, red meat eating Republican primary voters for 2024, and doesn't really care about Floridians in 2022, as evidenced by the lack of evacuating Lee County before Ian approached. And these kinds of stunts and culture wars against LGBTQ, against Disney World, against African Americans and their right to vote, redlining out 2 African American congressional districts unilaterally, and the legislature let them do it because they're all afraid of them. Al Lawson's seat in the north, Al Deming's seat in Central Florida. These practices are appalling. They're destructive. They're tearing our Florida apart. That's why I'm running for governor, to bring Florida back together, to truly have a Florida for all. And that's why I wish you could give an endorsement, but you can still write stories. So that's a good thing. Thank God.
I wholeheartedly agree, and I appreciate you bringing that up, that we are going to be continuing to cover these races with the full force of our reporting staffs, and they are formidable. We and I do want to ask you a follow-up to the question, to your comments on the Martha's Vineyard flight, to the continued rumblings about future flights. We have heard in the last 24 hours that there may now be at least 1, possibly more, federal agencies that are purported to be or have said they are investigating this. Do you believe that there is one universal way to tackle this? Or what do you see as the best way forward to get at what happened with those flights, and what might be the political and legal implications for Florida?
Well, I think 2 things probably. I did see in the past 24 hours, Department of Treasury is investigating the flights and the appropriate use of funds that were designated for COVID treatment to fly migrants across the United States and make a political statement. To me, that is abundantly clear that that's inappropriate. It's a waste of taxpayers' dollars. Setting aside $12 million to do something like that, using COVID funds for a political stunt. COVID's still with us, sadly, and it's a problem, and we need to have a law-abiding governor. Law-abiding governor. That's not asking too much, is it? To abide by the law. The guy went to Harvard and Yale. He's not stupid, but he doesn't care, is the point. His political ambition surpasses his respect for the law. And that's a sad state of affairs for a state the size of Florida, or any state, honestly. I think that, pursue that investigation is how you address it. There's another investigation being done by a sheriff in Texas, as we've read about, and elect me as the next governor to make sure that these things stop. I mean, as a former attorney general, I have tremendous respect for the law and know that it needs to be adhered to. And while I've had my political ambition in my life, there's nothing wrong with ambition. or wanting to be an editor-in-chief. There's nothing wrong with wanting to do that. There is, however, something wrong with having blind ambition. And that's what I accuse our governor of. He has blind ambition and has forgotten our fellow Floridians, and protecting them in Lee County, making sure that African Americans have equal access to voting as all other Floridians with drop boxes in minority communities throughout the state. I mean, these are fundamental rights. These are civil rights. These are human rights as it related to the migrants. And he violates them time and time again. And, he's the real storm of Florida this year. And he continues to want to carry this political message across our country. And it makes my heart bleed for my Florida as the neglect that he is showing to us.
Thank you very much. I wanted to move forward to something that you have also already touched on, which is that you spoke of the governor's legislation that he asked for and received on the targeting LGBTQ plus discussions in school. And we've also learned in the last 24 hours that the State Board of Education is considering and may have already adopted some punishment, including teachers possibly losing their jobs for violating this policy, which many people have said is quite vague. Could you talk about that for a few minutes?
Sure, of course. Yeah, I mean, we all shouldn't be surprised. I mean, he's essentially fired a state attorney in Tampa Bay. He has gotten rid of members of school boards around the state. He doesn't respect local control. He wants to do things that will get rid of what these constitutionally elected local office holders are supposed to do for their local constituents. I mean, it's, if DeSantis gets reelected, you almost have to ask the question, why do we need school boards anymore? Because he's taken up their role, whether it's an executive order to not allow children to wear a mask in school at the height of the pandemic, and then punishing the 12 counties who deigned to oppose him on that to the tune of about $200 million. I mean, he is revengeful. He is a bully. He is not a good leader. He's not a compassionate man, and he has no empathy, except for himself and his future political ambition.
Those are very tough words, and I just want to note for the record, we have an open invitation to Governor DeSantis, and we would be happy to offer him the opportunity to talk directly to the Sentinel and Sun Sentinel readers on these issues. So that's something I wanted to make sure that I included in this. So far, we have not heard from the DeSantis campaign, but he is welcome, and we will provide that opportunity. And with that, I know that we have promised your campaign, because it is an incredibly busy time, that we would make sure that you got out of here in 30 minutes. So I would, unless my colleague Jay Reddick, who is our insight editor here at the Sentinel, has any more questions, I
think we can go ahead.
Okay, then I would like to offer you the opportunity to make a closing pitch for this discussion about why people should consider replacing Governor DeSantis with you in the November 8th election.
Well, if they want a governor who's going to be fair, if they want a governor that has a heart, if they want a governor who cares about them, sincerely cares about them, they should vote for me. And I can't think of one reason to vote for Governor DeSantis.
Well, that's pretty concise. We thank you very much for spending time with us. I understand that you'll be in Orlando this weekend.
I will.
So, I look forward to watching the rest of the campaign. I wish you and Governor DeSantis as well best of luck going forward, and thank you for taking time with us.